Look, sex is not a favor women do for men, right? As Patrice O'Neill once said, and I'm paraphrasing, her vagina is not worth anything more than my penis. In other words, it should be mutually gratifying. And if it isn't, somebody's doing something wrong. But at the end of the day, all of this hoopla around how sex is really centered about female pleasure and men are just lucky to be in the room, dead all of that. We're too old for that. Y'all know what it is. Onyx Report, right? Where we as black male justice advocates uplift men and boys using critical analysis. Here with Black Masculinist news for the day. This is related to it appears to be a tweet ran across my Facebook page by a guy who calls himself Fella in Versace. And one of the things he says to start it off is that most women are actually terrible in bed. He said, and the biggest problem is they don't even know it. Most women seem to confuse a man coming with him orgasming. He continues to say, let me open this up here. If we're being honest, many men rarely reach climax during sex. They just come. Now, see, this is important. And I've been saying this for years. There is a difference between ejaculation and climax. For men, we only talk about it for women. And that's mainly been because the sexual revolution was tied to the feminist movement. So for much of the last 60 years, discussions about sex had a lot more to do with centering women's pleasure, identifying what their needs are, be they emotional or physical, pointing out the shortcomings of men and their inability to anticipate women's needs and interests, but very little discussion about men. As a matter of fact, well, I'll share that with you in a moment. The kind of things I've heard said are really akin to this idea that as long as men can put their penis into something, they should be happy. But women need all kinds of fantastical support systems and practices and narratives to be able to be centered and taken seriously. And this kind of one-sided approach to sex really promotes all kinds of problems. But I continue with fellow in Versace. He goes into great lengths describing an experience he had. I'm not going to read all of it, but I'm going to share with you the tone so you get a sense of where he's going. He says, fellas, you know what I'm talking about. When you're hitting it, missionary position, you can't seem to come. He talks about switching into different positions, still not doing it. And from there, he actually talks about, playing the kind of mental porno we all have, past experiences, photos, things of that nature, whatever gets you to climax. And then at the end of the story, when he finally does sort of ejaculate, he quickly takes off the condom, hides it, and then verbally says, oh my God, this was great, blah, blah, blah. She seems quite pleased with herself. And he has to figure out a way to get out of the situation. They were going to plan to spend the day together, and he lies to get her out so that he can, not even so he can find another woman, so he can masturbate to actually please himself, right? Now, I don't talk about this because it's derogatory. I talk about it because it's real. And it's something that I've been saying for the longest. So you guys can hear all these bings. People are blowing up my page because I posted this in Facebook and people are responding. And there's already a huge discussion and it's only been up for a couple hours. What I said when I posted this is as follows. I apologize for the crassness and rudeness of the post, but that aside, damn, it's an interesting statement. I've been saying this for years. Even for men, there's a difference between ejaculating and orgasming. Most don't think men are even aware of the difference, especially many men themselves. I suspect we've been told for so long what must feel good for us sexually that we accept it. We've also been socially rewarded by both other men and women for who we're with based on how good she looks, and told that our social status is determined by that and the resources we're expected to have. So if we're told we're supposed to be excited just because we're having sex, again, that idea that it's some kind of a favor to men, even though both people get a lot of pleasure out of it, And especially in the Black community, the social expectation is that men have to do the work. So you can put in hours of work and she can lay there, and that's sex, right? But anyway, let me see. So if we're told that we're just excited just because we're supposed to be excited just because we're having sex, and feminism tells women they shouldn't have to do anything for a man, and that sex is strictly about their pleasure, where does this leave men? Especially in the Black community, we end up with men who are taught to prioritize her pleasure before and after sex, by the way. And Gen Xers especially can tell you about the long, extravagant seduction narratives and playlists and cassette tapes we used to have to create, the romantic ambiance, and of course validating her feelings afterwards. None of that had to do with how we felt or what we actually experienced, right? Anyway, it says, especially in the Black community, we end up with men who are taught to prioritize her pleasure before and after sex, while also being taught not to hurt her feelings by voicing his own displeasures. After all, if he doesn't enjoy it, there must be something wrong with him, right? This can make the sex act a dissertation on focusing solely on her, making starfish sex more of a given, but not teaching either men or women that men actually have wants beyond simple penetration. I'm going to share a couple other things I wrote because I may not remember to do so verbally. And then I'll share some of the responses I got from the brothers on the screen. I mean, the brothers in Facebook, right? So one of the things I said is I think social expectations of sex for men have to be discussed. Too much of the time, men are expected to please women or have his reputation sullied. This can start as early as middle school, but women don't believe they have to do anything other than show up, right? And because of this kind of dynamic, men will also tolerate no sex relationships, even to some degree, even if he doesn't want it, but he'll be punished for not liking it. Even that comes out of this one-way dynamic where we expect women to have their needs met in every capacity, but men have to either conform or be socially punished, right? And one brother write in, he said, I really thought this was not a thing. He said, I've had this happen several times and men never discuss it, so I thought my experiences were rare. And he's talking about the initial post, of course. And I had to let him know, no, this is a thing. And this is why I posted it. I didn't post it to be derogatory to women. I posted it because this is an experience many men have had. And even I've had these discussions with men for years, but it's never really been public. And I don't think men know how to talk about it publicly. And I think most are afraid of losing out on sex if they do. But it needs to be brought out. We're 60 years behind the times in this regard, so it's time to talk about it. Let's see here. A couple other things. I had at least one more response I wanted to share with you guys before we continue to move forward. Because there's some other things you guys probably need to see as far as this. All right. So I had one brother, Christopher, write in. It's not even about the finish. A lot of women are just boring at sex. Don't know how to ride, don't know how to do a few other things. And so I responded. I said, but the point is also about how you are expected to be good at pleasing her, even for the very first time, meaning you have to anticipate what she as an individual actually likes and master it, usually by the first, maybe second or third time. And of course, if you don't, the problem is yours. But she can lay there and it's acceptable, right? So I said, even for the first time, while she can be whatever and not really have to think about it, if not, you can be talked about negatively, meaning your reputation can be destroyed. Now, historically, women have been concerned about how they've been perceived once it's clear they actually enjoy sex, right, in terms of being called sluts and whores, etc. But few discuss how men are socially bullied to please without thought about mutual gratification. His needs are irrelevant, right? Here's another response that I thought it important to share with you. I said, the arrogance of one-way sexual pleasure is bad enough, but this dynamic also denies men from learning about what they actually really enjoy about sex or can enjoy. They learn about things via pornography, sure, but that's not the same thing. I've heard elder women tell younger women that all a man needs is a wet hole. That's an actual quote, right? Which only teaches women that men have no needs beyond penetration. But few sit down and explain to young men that sex, and we're not even talking about relationships yet, can mean more than acting out porno scenes, and that they don't have to fuck like porn stars to be loved. Lastly, much of sex is talked about as a favor women give to men that they should be grateful for or be expected to pay for with money, gifts, trips, or even marriages framed around one-way traditionalism that benefits her with security but provides him with nothing but obligation. And even after the marriage is over, if they get divorced, he has to continue to pay to secure her lifestyle while yet again receiving nothing, right? This is incorrect. It should be mutually beneficial and gratifying as is, meaning sex should be mutually beneficial. It is not a favor from one to the other. Both should get something out of it. And if you're not getting something out of it, you need to change up tactics until you do. But at the end of the day, it really isn't a favor. It isn't a gift. It isn't a one-way dynamic. So anyway, those are kind of things there. Now, there were some interesting responses that came, one of which was from a colleague of mine. And he didn't want to respond publicly, but he said, man, he just wrote me out the blue. And I had about 6 or 7 of these within the first hour. People, some of whom I knew, some I haven't met before, some I haven't talked to in years, even on Facebook Messenger. And they just started writing me out the blue. And he said, man, you're not lying about these women's bad bed skills. He said one woman was horrible at giving head and was even afraid to kiss. She came each time we had sex. I didn't come once. She didn't care. Another I was with for a couple years was too religious to have sex. When we actually did, she didn't move once. Right? Again, that's what I mean when I talk about the expectation. And actually, I've been talking about this since high school. And every time I've talked to men about it, they've always understood. They've always had stories that were similar, but we never generated a dialogue about it and explained it from men's standpoint. Sexual discussions in public are always about prioritizing women's feelings, not necessarily about the truth about what men experience. And we've had to hear the negative truths from women, even in the 80s, growing up, before I was even sexually active. Well, that doesn't include being, molested, but I'm saying when I actively was engaged, before I actively engaged in sex, I would hear these discussions about how men don't really make women come and they need to be more emotionally supportive and listen more and so on and so forth. There were all of these narratives, especially promoted on daytime talk television, but none of them actually talked about what women needed to do, because the base assumption, again, was that men were happy with a wet hole, right? He continues, he says, one told me she was afraid to make noises while having sex at all. So again, starfish sex, right? So another person actually posted something that I thought was interesting. Let me share that with you. He actually posted an Instagram because he wanted to kind of show me how women are talking about this. So the Instagram title is Women, What Does Sex Feel Like to Them? And so when you swipe, you can see the kind of responses. Let me see. Why is this? Oh, there we go. All right. It says, it's like when your back is itchy and they scratch your whole back except the itchy part. See, again, we're chastising men for whether or not they meet this imaginary standard women have or can have in their own heads about what sex is supposed to be like. Very little communication, but again, no dialogue about what's expected of her. And I'm just going to read some of these at random. I'll probably not go through all of them, but they're on the screen so you could look at them later. If y'all keep saying it's bad and why y'all still want it, that was a response to the women. You ever been disappointed? Yeah, it's that, right? Again, going back to sex. You ever been disappointed? Yeah, it's that, right? It's kind of like when your kids help you clean and you tell them they did a good job, but you end up doing it yourself. Interesting. You know how when you do a group project, but in order to finish it, you end up doing all the work yourself? Kind of like that. See, again, this is that feminist narrative. I've been seeing this since the 80s, right? This narrative that sex, the expectation of it in and of itself, is about her. And she can be snarky. She can be disrespectful. She can tell men all kinds of things about how horrible he's doing, or she can patronize him and complain about him online. But men have actually been having these kind of feelings for generations, and we've not known how to talk about it, nor have we articulated it publicly. See, those are all people that are still responding to this. Let me see. It's like singing your favorite song in the car, but Google Maps gives directions during the chorus. All of these kind of negative critiques. Let me see. Like when you're a kid and your parents say they're taking you to Disneyland, and they drive right past it. Okay. Yeah. you can see these. When you waited 45 minutes for the DVD logo to hit the corner of the screen and it hits the side, you know, when you're pointing at something and screaming right there and the person is looking everywhere but that spot, you get the idea. These are the perception. And this is par for the course. This has been going on for the longest. This is nothing new about how we discuss sex. Again, we discuss it primarily in regard to her interests. And I'm saying it's really about time that men actually start to talk about their experiences. And yes, I do think we need to get to a point of balance where we can have these discussions amicably in a constructive way. Because one of the things that did happen is I also had a woman write to me and she said, you know, I do kind of therapy with women, particularly around issues of sex, but we've not yet talked about this. And she said, how can women, actually find ways to improve their performance with their partners? And she asked if I knew if there was any literature about this. I myself do not. I've only run across a couple of articles online talking about men faking orgasms. So if any of you know, please feel free to share it in the comment section and I'll share it with her as well as with the public. But at the end of the day, one of the things I told her is even if there's a body of literature around this, notice how it's not mainstream. It's not mainstream because the narrative that we've been familiarized with most is one that suggests that men have no feelings, men have no reflections. Again, if anything, all they need is a glory hole or a wet hole, and that's the end of it, right? And this is one of the things I want to complicate. This is one of the things I want to disrupt. I want men to speak out, but even if they don't or don't know how, I want to give or lay out a framework, you know, for how to go about it. And that's why I've been reading some of these things that I posted, because I want you guys to see how this dynamic plays out. You know what I mean? I want you to actually see that you're not alone in this too. And some of these cats are doctors who are writing some of this privately and publicly. You know, one man wrote, "This hit way too close to the realness. Too many of us black men are always in protection mode, even protecting women from their own shortcomings, right? Not able to discuss it outwardly." Let me see. And some of it can get crass. It is what it is. You know, women don't seem to care, or I should say some of these feminist discussions don't really care about how men feel reading it. But all of a sudden, when men express their opinions, especially if it's potentially hurtful, now all of a sudden men have to prioritize feelings. And yet again, that's why we're here, because we've already been doing that. And again, as I said in one of my posts, this stuff starts as early as middle school. It ain't new. It's been going on for the longest. But we did reach a new era in the 80s where how we even thought about it changed. Started in the 60s, it culminated in the 80s. And that era was to call out bad sex, to call out people not being pleased. But again, only when it applied to women. Okay? So anyway, I hope you guys got something out of this. I'm really looking forward to reading your comments. And let's start the discussion. All right, y'all? Y'all have a good one. Talk to you soon. Peace.